Mr. Vice President, thank you so much for joining us for California Politics 360.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. We wanted to talk about starting with immigration, which of course the nation is focused on. And here in California, watchdogs say even this month we're seeing as many as 15 raids a day in Southern California. Should Californians be concerned?
Well, look, the American people have a right to expect that federal and state and local officials will enforce the law. And I would say particularly with individuals that may have crossed our border illegally with criminal intent. I mean, I welcome the efforts that the new Trump administration has made to secure the southern border after the worst border crisis in American history under the Biden administration. But I also appreciate the focus on dangerous criminal illegal aliens that are in our communities. Now, the tragedy that took place in Minneapolis, not once but twice, in police-involved shootings deserves a full examination, as is warranted in every instance like that. And I think it's important that we respect the right of peaceable assembly, that we respect the freedom of speech rights of people that may object to certain policies. But at the end of the day, I think it's important that we see officials on both sides of the aisle and both parties at every level working together to make sure our streets are safe and the law is enforced.
To the point of talking about First Amendment rights, California could become the first state in the nation to allow citizens to file lawsuits against federal agents and federal officers if their rights are violated, specifically First, Fourth, Fifth Amendment rights. Do you support something like that that's still in play at our state capitol?
You know, I grew up in a family. My uncle was a police officer in Chicago, Illinois, and I have family members that are going into law enforcement as we speak. I think it's really important to understand just how difficult the job is for those who wear the uniform on the thin blue line, and that immunity that exists for law enforcement officers in doing their duty is a very important part of both recruitment and retention, and I think it needs to be preserved. I would caution against any erosion of that immunity. Now, where there is wrongdoing, I think law enforcement officers, like any one of us, should be held to the strictest account before the law. Anytime there's a police-involved shooting, as has occurred now twice in Minneapolis, there ought to be a thorough and full investigation, transparent to the public. But eroding that sovereign immunity that law enforcement enjoys, I think, would not be in the interest of public safety, and I would encourage people to rethink that.
Let's talk about the impact of tariffs here in California. Like many states, we struggle with affordability issues. Our farmers, in particular in this region, have really worried about the tariffs. Where do you feel like a state like California can stand up to that?
Well, you know, during the Trump-Pence administration, we used tariffs as a means of negotiating trade deals, like with South Korea. The USMCA deal, the largest trade deal in history, was built in some respects on the potential for tariffs. But what President Trump has done since Liberation Day is to unilaterally impose tariffs on friend and foe alike. And I think the American people are beginning to awaken in the city and on the farm that despite what the administration has said about foreign companies or foreign countries paying the tariffs, people are realizing more every day that American businesses and American families pay American tariffs. For my part, my hope is that the Supreme Court will soon rescind the president's use of the emergency authority to impose these tariffs. When you look at the Constitution, the power to tax, the power to tariff, belongs to the Congress and to the American people, not to the executive branch exclusively. And While that's changed a bit over the last 100 years in the law, my hope is that the Supreme Court will set that right and give us a fresh start and bring real relief to farmers and to businesses and manufacturers against the weight of these tariffs that have placed a real burden on American families.
Last question, and that is, in your home state in Indiana, the lawmakers declined to redraw political maps mid-decade, but obviously here in California they did. And if we use those maps, Republicans in this state could be down to only 4 districts out of 52. Why do you think on the federal level Republicans haven't done more to fight redistricting here in California?
Well, I would tell you that I always hew to the Constitution. And the Constitution says that the time, place, and manner of federal elections is set by the states. And so I defer to that decision in Indiana. I defer to that decision even here in California. But I think the American people would like to see us move beyond partisan gerrymandering as a rule, and see about creating congressional districts that are more equitable, and let the American people really have a more effective voice. I served in the Congress for 12 years. It is the people's house. It ought to be representative of all the American people, and that the overt partisan gerrymandering, which of course there's a long tradition of, has I think tends to result in greater partisanship ultimately in Washington. And at a time when I think our politics is more divided than ever before, my hope is, whether it's in the courts or whether it's in the court of public opinion, that we'll let the people decide about the future of the country and our elected representatives more effectively.
All right. Mr. Vice President, thank you so much for joining us here for California Politics 360.
Thank you, Edie. Good to be with you.